Today we find ourselves in the middle of Lent, and we continue to reflect on the Lenten themes of dying, death, and the hope of rising again. And today we are looking at the campus chapel of the Jesuit University of Central America in San Salvador. We are here to reflect on the events of November 16, 1989, recognizing that, though past, these events remain present to us and in us as we are attentive and receptive. Once inside, we see this light, airy chapel, made especially so by its openness to the gardens outside. In this climate, no thick walls need protect us from the cold, and no first-world luxuries like air conditioning protect us from the heat. Since November 1989, this chapel has been a religious memorial to the 6 Jesuit professors, their housekeeper, and her daughter, who were killed here by Salvadoran military. To the left of the altar area, we can see the square gray stones wherein are housed the created remains of the Jesuits. Behind the altar, we see icons to the left and right of the cross, offering stylized portrayals of El Salvador's turbulent history. These icons highlight in particular the exploitation of the vast majority of its people and the brutal repression by military and government forces acting on behalf of the wealthy for at least 2 centuries. All this artwork came from the imagination and hand of Fernando Llort, L-L-O-R-T, a Salvadoran artist. Llort was born in 1949 and grew up in San Salvador, but in his 20s he moved to a small town called La Palma in northern El Salvador. He attended a Catholic seminary briefly and was part of a rock band called the Band of the Sun. One day when walking the streets he saw a child rubbing a brown object on a rock. When the white core became visible, Llort realized that the object was a seed. The framing of the brown shell around the white interior struck his imagination, and he opened a workshop for teaching people to paint and draw. He called the workshop The Seed of God. When the Civil War began, he moved back to San Salvador and opened a gallery called the Tree of God. From there he gained international fame, and his works have been displayed in numerous capital cities. He was drawn to a life of simplicity, always devoted to God, and always helping people gain dignity through art as lovers and observers of art, as well as artists. Such a vision of life gave him a deep compassion for the devastation and destruction that El Salvador suffered, especially in the Civil War in the 1980s. On the back wall of the chapel are mounted black and white pen and ink drawings of human figures, probably dead, bound in grotesque positions with marks of torture and disfigurement on their bodies. During the Civil War, the government and military carried on a reign of terror against any group or anyone suspected of opposing the status quo. This official terrorism ceased with the Peace Accords of 1992. If we left the chapel the way we entered and turned right onto the sidewalk, we would walk down past a long, undistinguished one-story building where the Jesuits lived and arrive at the Monsignor Romero Center with its offices, classrooms, and museum. If we walked straight ahead in through the entryway, we would walk into the garden where the 5 of the 6 Jesuits were killed. The museum offers photos of the 6 Jesuits, as well as their clothes, with bullet holes and blood, as well as books damaged by the machine gun fire that killed Joaquin Lopez y Lopez in his room. In the museum, we see portraits of the 6 Jesuits: Joaquin Lopez, Juan Ramon Moreno, Ignacio Ellacuria, and then Armando Lopez, Segundo Montes, and Ignacio Martin Barro. One additional member of the community, John Sobrino, was in Bangkok at that time to give a talk, Had he been in residence, he too would have been killed. The Jesuits were professors known for advocating for justice for the poor, and consequently the target of the government and military. Such were the high emotions and misused vocabulary of that era that even the New York Times could say in 1991 that the Jesuit priests, quote, were well-known leftist intellectuals who had long been associated with leaders of the rebel FMLN party. Congressional investigators have said their slayings were probably a vengeful response to a major guerrilla offensive taking place in San Salvador at that time. End quote. Beginning in 1989, the same year as the killings, Obdulio Ramos became the gardener who tended this garden. His wife Elba was the Jesuits' cook and housekeeper. Their daughter Selena was a high school student. They lived away from the campus in an area that suffered violence during the Civil War. The Jesuits invited Elba and Selena to stay with them in a room at the end of the long Jesuit residence we passed as we walked to the Romero Center. The thought was that Elba and Selena would be safer on campus with the Jesuits than in their own home. Ironically, when members of the Rapid Reaction Battalion arrived at the residence, they killed the women to eliminate any possible witnesses. After the killings, Obdulio planted 6 red rose bushes in honor of the Jesuits and 2 yellow rose bushes for Elba and Selena. We preserve what helps us remember moments. Also preserved along with the books and the clothing were bits of blood-stained, dried grass from the spot where the 5 were killed, and the carpet where the 6th was killed. The lush foliage of this garden is a rich reminder of God's love poured into the world, especially in the face of the witness to faith that these 6 Jesuits and 2 lay women offered. A witness is, in New Testament Greek, a martyr, or a martyr is a witness. A walkway leads from the garden to the room in which the 2 women were staying and where they were killed, and a stone marker next to the door calls us to remember. Finally, a mural in the chapel by Antonio Bonilla, entitled Requiem for the Martyrs, draws on the same themes as his larger mural we visited 2 weeks ago at the National Archaeological Museum. Our final reminder of the martyrs are these tombstones to the side of the altar area of the church. May these 8 martyrs rest in peace and offer us inspiration and hope for our lives, our ministries, and our adversities as we continue to follow Jesus and all martyrs through their passion and death to resurrection.